is 803-359.
That's Lexington, South Carolina, not to be confused with Lexington, North Carolina. This is the morning of day 3 of the long phone trip from Greenville, North Carolina to Atlanta. At this point in the recording, all I know is what I found out last night right before I collapsed on the bed at the motel. I picked up the phone, dialed something, and heard what sounded like a Senderized XY. And my impression was that it was the same sort of system as Prince William County, Virginia. Unlike Prince William County, sounds like the equipment here is not all Stromberg-Carlson. In fact, I'm not sure that this Senderized system is necessarily a Stromberg, although it certainly sounds very close to it. We don't hear that classic Stromberg low tone in the local area here. You know what that reminds me of? A bike horn.
Yeah, a bike horn.
In fact, the low tone here sounds like something made by GTE Automatic Electric, one of the nicer ones. It's kind of a rich, very pleasant tone. I'll let you hear that first, actually. I'm going to dial the vacant code 511. The register sender will dial 85, which apparently is where the vacant codes are supposed to go. That has a nice rich tone, and if you'd like to hear that with a different EQ, all we have to do is try to dial a long distance call. Now it seems like I didn't even try dialing 1 plus from this coin phone. It's not allowed. But what I did try is dropping the register sender and dialing a 1 on the outgoing switching train, which did go into the long distance trunk. You drop the register sender here by dialing the local office code 359. So I'm going to dial 359, the register sender will drop, then I'll dial a 1 and we'll go into some sort of a T-carrier trunk, which based on other calls I would say is in Columbia. Southern Bell's long-distance tandem. When the trunk goes off hook asking for our number, we get dropped to that very same reorder we heard on the vacant code. But this time the EQ is different. There's a lot more high frequencies in it. Another way to hear that same rich low-tone source is the local busy signal, which I think I'm reaching by dialing some version of my own number. I'm dialing a 3595 number. Now, I don't recall whether this payphone was in the 9000 group, and the 9s are doubled with the 5s. But anyway, here is some 3595 number going to a busy signal. 359 drops the register sender, 5 goes into the 5000 group of 359. On that busy signal, you could hear one phase of the ring, maybe the only audible ring phase, I don't know. But let's dial an actual ringing number now in 359. It'll go through the same way. 359 just drops the register sender, and then the thousandth digit, whatever it is dialed directly onto the first selector. By the way, the tick that connector made going into the line was a rather unusual sound. I actually had to go back and make sure that wasn't some artifact created by my removing the hum from the tape. It is not. In fact, let me play you the original tape that has some hum. Same thing right before it starts to ring. "359-2111 is a vacant number, which is on vacant number intercept with a very pleasant voice, and at the end you actually get to hear that Lexington low tone again with a different EQ.
The number you have reached is not in service at this time, and there is no new number. Please be sure you have checked the telephone directory for the right number and you are dialing correctly. This is a recording. 803-359.
Ah, that is pretty stuff, all of it. Double ring on the intercept trunk. Now, does that text sound familiar? Well, I could be wrong because occasionally I'll forget a particular example, but I don't think there's anywhere else in the country, except Southern California, that uses that set of words. I think there's one slight variation in the wording, but it's almost exactly the wording of Pacific Telephone, the Bell Company, in Southern California.
The number you have reached is not in service at this time, and there is no new number. Please be sure you have checked the telephone directory for the right number and are dialing correctly. This is a recording.
The next call is an attempt to find out what happens in the partial dial condition here in Lexington. Here I'm dialing a 2, and the register senders here are programmed oddly. Normally, in both the Stromberg and the AE system, and this one sounds like the Stromberg, partial dial is not something that is left to chance. Let's pause a moment and listen for the crosstalk and never mind the traffic noise. Okay, it finally timed out. Now, to review, I had dialed a 2 and I just sat there. And it's going to turn out that what we've ended up in is a connector switch, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's how it started. We dialed a 2, and the register sender pulse repeated that into the switching train, putting us into the 359-2000 group. Now that much is okay because it can be taken back. The register sender is still there. But then, as we sat there, instead of resetting the switching train and redirecting us to intercept or a reorder, it just dialed a 1 and dropped, and that was what that last noise you heard was. So we're sitting right now on a connector in the 359-2100 group. It makes no sense at all. But hey, I can dial 2 more digits, and I'll happen to get a number on intercept.
The number you have reached is not in service at this time, and there is no new number. Please be sure you have checked the telephone directory for the right number and you are dialing correctly. This is a recording. 803-359.
All right, so now we've heard that rich Lexington low tone with 4 different EQs. Actually 5, because the first selector makes a little burst of it when it cuts through. So I want to put a snippet of each of those, one after another. just to see how the EQ changes on that same low-tone source depending upon where it's used in the CO. Following is a brief snippet of the reorder used on busy levels, the reorder for toll restriction, the busy signal on a busy line, and the busy signal at the end of the intercept recording, and then after that I'll put the sound of that first selector cutting through to a level. Well, each one of those had a unique EQ. Same tone source, 4 different ways to hear it. So now let's see what happens when we just leave the phone off the hook. This is a weekday morning. I can tell by the tape. Lots of activity. It's before 10 a.m. So I'm going to let the dial tone play without talking on it. We're going to hear a lot of little high-frequency ticks. I think each one corresponds to someone getting dial tone, but I'm not absolutely sure. Now that sounded as if the register sender just dropped without dialing anything, and I think it did. But when I dial a 5, we're going to get a dial tone. And that was just a regular old new dial tone. What that means is that when the register sender timed out before, it didn't just drop, it did something else. Probably what it did was to put us on the lockout relay associated with our particular line. So we were just nowhere, completely off the switching equipment, and my dialing a digit put us back in line for a dial tone, which came on once the digit ended. Now in Occoquan, Virginia in 1973, timing out the dial tone meant letting the register sender drop so that you were left on the switching train to dial whatever you liked. Here, letting the dial tone time out means going to lockout. Not very interesting. But we can drop the register sender by just dialing the local office code 359. And by the way, as we'll see when we explore the switching train, it's not surprising that they have lockout relays for every line in this office, because it's not very big. There's a maximum of 5,000 lines in this whole central office entity. So now let's find out what the switching train looks like, at least the outgoing part of it. You'll have to forgive me in 1977 for using the term director when this is not the AE director system. We did have the AE director system in the Elizabeth City area, in northern Charlottesville, Virginia, in St. Petersburg, in Creedmoor, North Carolina, in the Durham area, etc. But not here. This is something else. But I didn't know. So when I say director, I mean register sender.
Okay, now some direct control stuff. Director drops out when you dial 359, so I'm going to go through the switching train and see what there is. That was 359-1311, and when the camera trunk souped, of course, I got the reorder. Three 592 was a working 1,000 group in the exchange, and then I'll continue going through, and when I hit another working 1,000 group, I'll just go to the next. And if we don't find all the trunks there should be on a special selector, then we'll have to go through and check 100 groups.
Last two calls, I dialed 359 to drop the register sender. Then I tried 3 and found myself in the 359 3000 group. Same thing with 4. So far we've got toll on 1, 2, 3, and 4 each go to 1000 group of 359. Now there could be other outgoing trunks mixed in with those 1000 groups, but first I'm going to see if there isn't a special selector on the first selector somewhere, some level that has things other than 359 numbers in it. That's the more likely pattern. At this point, I can say this sounds like an XY, not a regular step. It's the way the selectors sound when they cut in. I'll give you 2 examples from the last 2 calls. This one, see how that sounds kind of metallic? And then this one, very XY-like. Very. And yet the local supervision test and the tone plant do not sound like Stromberg-Carlson products. Next, I'll check out 5 and 6 on the first selector, and then 7.
The first 3 digits you have dialed are incorrect. Please check your number and dial again. This is a recording. The first 3 digits you have dialed are incorrect. Please check your number and dial again. This is a recording. The first 3...
Okay, 5 and 6 also were 1000 groups of the 359 office. 7 has gone to an ESS tandem. I dialed 359, that dropped the register sender. 7 went into a very subtle T-carrier trunk, a new one, very recent, high-quality stuff. I then dialed 3 digits which were invalid. By the time that ringtone came on, you could tell that it is T-carrier. But not bad.
The first 3 digits you have dialed are incorrect.
And that's the recording coming from a number 1 ESS of Southern Bell. This is the local number 1 ESS office in Columbia that's being used as a tandem from here. Now on 8, I found an actual second selector that isn't a part of the 359 incoming 1000 group. In fact, there are no 359 8 numbers. So when I dial 359 plus 8, I'm going into a second selector that is for outgoing purposes and has trunks on it, such as 80 for ringback, which I stumbled into. Well, you'll hear. I dialed 359, that dropped the register sender. We're on the first selector. That was 8, which went into a second selector, and now 0 goes into the ringback circuit. I'm going to dial 2 digits and hang up. I'm on hook, and when I pick up, there, that was the ring supply being a little slow to trip. That last sound was the ring tripping. Not very exciting, but what we've discovered is there is a second selector on 8. 0 is ringback.
Okay, on 80 I found ringback, which is a good place for it considering the code is 80. And now I'm going to see what's on 9. Then I'll demonstrate what's on 0, of course. Then I'll jam the 8s.
Forgive me for letting this reorder tone play so much and so long. It's because there's traffic. There's people coming in and dialing over it, and you can hear that. It's subtle, but it's there, so it's real activity in real time going on. This part that I'm speaking over is looped, but never mind, you're not supposed to pay attention. This answers a question that I had earlier. My payphone is not 3599 something, it's 3595 something. There is no 359 9000 group. This last call proves it. Now watch this. There, I hung up to get a new dial tone, and totally by accident, a relay bounce caused us to go into the toll trunk. We're sitting here listening to T-Carrier. And unfortunately, I hung up. I should have stayed on to see how it timed out, because I might have been able to hear this.
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Will you please hang up and try again? This is a recording, 8032.
Locally.
Oh, locally.
That's right, locally. She's a famous person because she's the voice of the Columbia 4A. But in an upcoming segment, we will hear her locally on the intercept, with no long-distance noise. The recording, not that operator, although it almost sounds like the same person, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, your call did not go through. Oh, locally.
Here's what's on the 0 level of the first selector.
Operator.
Got you by mistake, sorry.
May I help you?
Now I'm going to call again. I didn't mean to get you. Bye-bye.
Okay, so the first selector is mapped. Levels 2 through 6 are the terminating 1,000 groups of the 359 office. That's a maximum of 5,000 lines. 1 is the toll trunk. 7 is the Columbia ESS tandem. 9 is vacant. 8 is a second selector, which we'll go through in the next program. 0 is the operator, which is a chord board. And speaking of that...
Operator.
Okay, there's my favorite low tone again. I'm going to have to put that in the lineup. This register sender has an ability that the ones in Prince William County, Virginia did not have. In Manassas, Occoquan, and Dale City, I never saw a register sender repeating a digit the customer dials, pulse by pulse. They didn't really need that feature. Here, that feature is used. And one of the places where it's used is when you dial 0. Probably when you dial 1 as well, but I didn't see that on the tape. The first thing it does when you get that dial tone is whatever digit you dial, it repeats it into the switching train. Now, if that digit turns out to be a 1 or a 7 or a 0, then it lets it stand and drops right out. And it works great because you're going to dial digits that follow into the trunks that are accessed by a 1 or a 7. In the case of 0, you're done because there's no 0 plus dialing yet. but that puts the call through right away and releases the register sender as soon as possible. But if you dial any other digit, it repeats it into the switching train, but then before it's done with you, it ends up taking it back, resetting that first selector, and ending up dialing something else. We'll see that in the next program. So here's actually picking up the phone and dialing a 0, and you'll notice the register sender drops out right away.
Operator.
Can you tell me what codes I can call locally here?
For information?
No, what exchanges can I dial locally?
Oh, locally. Lexington, you can dial Columbia, Gilbert, and Pegan.
Oh, so I can also call Columbia?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, cool. She's on 2600 carrier. Why another operator didn't answer, I don't know. Might have to do with the fact that it's 9 o'clock in the morning on a weekday and they're busy, so eventually maybe someone would have answered. But also, the trunk didn't go back to the ringtone. Double ring? That was just convenient. They had that particular ring supply available, so they just wired it up. Hey, whatever works. Anyway, when we dial 0 here, the register sender drops out almost immediately, indicating that it allowed the pulses of that first digit into the switching train. See, it's gone, and here we are. Didn't drop out so fast that we heard the cut-in noise, however. Had it been a little faster, we might have heard this. That was edited, but probably realistic. Well, that's it for program 1, but there's at least another program in which we're going to go through the 8 selector, and we will at least start to go through Columbia, which is a very Bell system place, a lot of crossbar 5. That's next. This program is dedicated to Bill Acker, whose style on that tape to Alan showed me that I could do these things in a different style. It never occurred to me to talk fast and be an excited nerd when I did this. It never occurred to me.